topic today is content ideation, but I want to take it a little bit outside of the typical, here's how you brainstorm and find ideas. I will talk about that, but actually the places I see Portent get into the most trouble is not coming up with ideas. We have plenty of ideas. It's implementation and it's promotion and kind of thinking it all through at the start. So the first thing I'm going to say is this, because it seems like our default mode is to create an infographic. Not everything has to be an infographic. Please, God, do something else sometimes. What do I really mean when I talk about content and ideation? Well, obviously, content's pretty important. It's, only third level in the stack. It's an element. It kind of pushes everything. But ideation is not just coming up with the idea. There's more to it than that. It's thinking about how you're going to promote it. It's thinking about the sources for whatever it is you're creating, the format, so infographic, long form, whatever, the kind of media you're going to use to present it, and then, the ideas. And it doesn't have to happen in any particular order. This is just kind of, how I wrote them down because they do a nice, neat sort of funnel shape, to be honest. So the first thing is the format or the type. What are you going to create and how? Now, sometimes this is the second thing because you come up with the idea first. I'll explain the difference between times when you come up with the idea first and when you come up with the format first. I came up with a really rough picture of cost and time for different kinds of content. Obviously, this can change depending on exactly what you're doing. But, in my experience, like writing a single product description is generally the least cost. It actually takes a little more time than writing a 400-word blog post because it's a lot harder to write 3 sentences of something and get the point across than it is to write 400 words. Long-form content takes a long time and costs a lot of money. And infographics, are actually probably slightly behind long-form content. It depends on the production value that you're putting into it. And then homepage, again, it may only be 4 sentences, but it's pretty key stuff. And then video, a video ad style thing is the most costly and time consuming because generally you have to write a script, you have to get an actor in, you have to pay the actor, you have to get a video crew, you have to pay the video crew. So all that kind of adds up over time. That's supposed to say if the client dictates. I don't know what that word means. Hopefully it's not a word. But if the client dictates, then you got to decide the format now, because they may just be saying, I need product descriptions, right? In which case you're writing product descriptions. Otherwise, you're going to want to come up with the idea first. What I usually do is I come up with, I'm going to write something about marketing strategy. And then I think about, all right, what's the range of topics I can cover? And am I going to try to cover them all in a single piece of content, or am I going to split them up, or what am I going to do? If it's a product description, you can stop here as far as ideation. I mean, you've pretty much covered it at that point. The client's probably going to have the product for you. They're already going to have a style throughout their site. You don't really have to do any research. Unless it's a really unusual website, there's going to be 1 or 2 images and text. And probably all we're doing is the text in this case. If it's a homepage or email, you may get to come up with your own idea. At least within the constraints that the client provides. So, if that's the case, then you can definitely go in and say, all right, given the fact that you sell this one product and it's a total commodity and there's 1,000 other websites out there to talk about it, I think we should do something really unusual. So, let's present all the information about your rubber grommets using a small dog. Something like that. Although you'd probably get hit for copyright infringement then. Now you can start thinking about the types and the ideas. So just some of the types of content I think of, and you have to be really careful. Do not let the types of content dictate your idea or how you create it. Okay, I'm just talking about typical stuff. But it doesn't have to look like, it can be informational without being an infographic. It can be, long without being long-form content. There's a lot of possibilities. But one of the typical formats is long-form content. And I'm using stuff that I've written so we don't get in trouble when this video goes up on the internet. Long form is generally going to be something that's in its own format, its own template, probably separate to, but separate from, but related to the website template. It's going to be designed specifically for that content. It's generally going to be 3,500 to 4,000 words minimum. For me, typically, it's a hair under 10,000.
I do apologize.
Yeah, no problem. It's, generally it's going to be almost an ebook. It's also generally a pretty deep dive into a topic. A blog post is, it's a blog post. And do not undervalue a good blog post. The best hits Portent has had, really, content-wise, have been those basic blog posts. For this one client that made RV mattresses, we did 2 blog posts that absolutely took them stratospheric. And they were just, they took some work. We put some time into them, but, they were 400 or 500 word blog posts. They weren't, 20,000 word long form content or anything. Then there's some other stuff. There's Instagram images, and I separate this from regular images because Instagram is sort of its own unique medium, right? The images you present are going to look a little bit different. For one thing, they're all going to be square, right? A typical image, maybe you're just pushing an image live on your own website, and maybe that's all there is. Or maybe it's an image you're going to try to turn into a meme or something like that. So that's another type of content. And the main reason I'm talking about this is to try to expand the idea of what content is, because typically when clients come to us for content, they want text, right? And they want keywords mentioned a certain number of times in that text. And that is like the tiniest, most limited use of content ever. Just you have to think outside of that. You have to push them outside of it a little too. If they say they want content to help them with search, just say, okay, that's great. And then explain to them that you want to do this long form content with all these fancy images in it and stuff. And when they say, well, but how does that help? Say, well, this is going to get you a lot of attention. This is going to get you a lot of citations, and that's good for search. But it's also good for all these other things. An online poster, something that people print, and printable content's a big one. One of our clients, Mom Agenda, has done really well by creating printable content that they distribute. A short form or long form video, really short form like a Vine, or an ad style, or a training piece. Plain old text. Just a page with lots of text on it. It can happen. A presentation. So, an actual, something goes up on SlideShare. We've done really well because of SlideShare. We get a lot of leads from SlideShare, actually. And this shouldn't say long form, this should say interactive. But interactive content, where you go there, you do something, and you get a response. And then finally, infographics. If it's done really well, that's great. I have a book at home called The Best Infographics of 2013. I'm going to try to remember to bring it into work if you want to take a look at it. You'll note that most of them don't look anything like what people typically call an infographic. For example, large format type does not make anything an infographic. It's usually actually because of the information that's in it. Now we get to the idea, and we are frequently asked to come up with ideas for things that really, truthfully, are hard to come up with ideas for, right? Velcro. Okay, you hear something like that and you say, oh shit, how am I going to come up with an idea for this? I actually had to do one. Well, I actually had to do one for Velcro, now that I mention it. But you want to start then, first of all, you can use your brain, right? Just come up with ideas, brainstorm. That's a really good way to start. Do not let the client don't let yourself go down this rabbit hole of one particular way of thinking about the product. I see this a lot both inside of Portent and out, where people immediately think, okay, I'm going to do content about this product, therefore it must be branded, it must talk about the client, it must talk about how the client's product is used, et cetera, et cetera. That's not going to get you the interest of a wider audience, right? That's just going to get you the interest of people who are already there to buy the product. The media is not going to care. People who don't know about the product yet aren't going to care. So you're not going to get the discovery audience, not even the search audience. You're going to get people who already came to the site. So questions I like to start with are, basic things you would ask about any product. How does it work? Who invented it and how? What was that person like? What was the process of its being invented like? How do people use it? Are there any really bizarre uses or uses that people don't know about? Has it ever shown up in a movie or a book? or whatever. Has anyone built a monument? There is, for example, an RV Stonehenge. It's true, there's a recreational vehicle Stonehenge. What's already been written about it? You don't want to copy, but there may be ideas out there that you can riff on. What's the weirdest fact about it? And then, where has it been used over time? Sometimes it can be interesting. Someone just published an interactive graphic of IKEA, and IKEA is spread through the world, and it almost looks like, all the movies about zombie apocalypse, just shows the virus spreading worldwide. So that can be really interesting. What are the most common questions that are asked about the product? So you can go on sites like Quora. You can go on Twitter and just search with a question mark. Stack Overflow, Reddit, whatever. Depending if it's a techie product, Stack Overflow can work really well. I wouldn't go on those sites and ask questions. That it's a very kind of cynical, scornful audience, and it's better to just sort of observe and hover about. Some of the searches I like to use on any of these sites is the product, and then in quotes, is it possible, history, weird uses, how do I, what if, problem, dangerous, questions, bug, broken, things like, you can use phrases too, I researched for days in quotes and then space Velcro or something like that. I couldn't find a solution for, great use for whatever. So I went on to Quora and I did a search for Velcro. And there were some here that were, interesting, but not like all that fantastic. I guess, is quiet Velcro possible? Could be interesting. If, like the people we wrote about Velcro for were, it was a military supplier, and they actually stopped using Velcro because there was no way to make it quiet. Instead, it's these plastic clips that are supposed to be silent. But this was a good one. Is it possible to stick someone to the wall with Velcro? So I went out and I started searching on people trying to stick themselves to walls with Velcro. And there's everything from some of the most horrifically politically incorrect stories about trying to stick people and things to walls with Velcro, to more typical ones, to can I use Velcro to stick myself to the mast of my ship in a storm? I'm not kidding. Okay? And then there's, can I wear Velcro shoes to walk on my ceiling? There was a lot of really funny stuff. So if I was getting to do anything I wanted, I'd probably start with that. But it doesn't have to be funny. I mean, it could be a really good comprehensive history of Velcro. It's very interesting. Like they, burrs, the things that get stuck to you and your dog when you go. That's where it came from. That's what created the idea. And the guy who invented it, everybody laughed at him for so long and said that it would never go anywhere. And then you can go to the content idea generator if you want. Why you shouldn't eat Velcro in bed. That was a little strange, but I thought it was pretty funny, so I just put it there. The main thing is don't start thinking of how you're going to present this in a web browser. Okay, that's not our job. Okay, our job is to think of how we're going to talk about this content. How are we going to present it in a way that's just really interesting to people? How are we either going to contribute to the body of knowledge out there about this product, or how are we going to aggregate the body, a body of knowledge, or how are we going to bring this product to a larger audience by either making it look ridiculous, useful, dangerous, practical, whatever. And then adding to the body of knowledge, there's lots of possible ways to do that, right? You can do explainers. Here's how you use Velcro. You can do things to avoid. Do not attempt to stick yourself to a wall using Velcro, or more serious things. So now you've come up with an idea. Probably you've come up with multiple ideas, hopefully, because of course you're going to shop these to the client and they're going to reject a whole bunch of them. I recommend putting the idea that you most want somewhere in the middle or at the end. Don't put it first. The client will reject the first thing out of hand. People can tell me if that's different for them, but in my experience, it doesn't matter what you put in front of them first. You could put a $5 bill on the table and they won't touch it. So once you have a few ideas, the next thing before you present it to anyone is to look for sources. So if this is going to be something that requires data of any kind, like, if you're going to gather the weirdest, dumbest ways people have tried to use Velcro, for example, how are you going to go get that information? Because it's not just about what you can search for and find on Google. Possibly, there may be more out there. So if it's something where you're just looking for people to submit stuff, you can just do an online survey using something like SurveyMonkey. That's pretty straightforward. It's not that hard. You can just put it out there and let people. I did a consumer survey, a Google consumer survey. A SurveyMonkey survey for this presentation I'm doing next week. It cost us I think $1,000 total, and we got 300 answers. I had SurveyMonkey actually send the survey to specific people who met specific demographic criteria. You can also ask a question on Facebook. You can go on Quora and ask there, all sorts of things. A commission survey is where you actually hire a survey company. That can get very expensive, but it can be worth it. You can find existing databases through sites like census.gov or InfoChimps or whatever, and you can do in-house testing. We once worked for a company that made rings out of some super hard metal. I can't remember what it is anymore. So to demonstrate how hard the ring was, we put it in a blender and turned on the blender, and the ring came flying out the side of the blender after shattering glass in a million directions. But it did make a pretty good video because then the ring was unscratched. So that's in-house testing, which can be really expensive if someone actually gets a piece of glass on their eye or something. But the truth is the time required and the cost can vary widely for any of these things. I mean, an online survey, if you need 10,000 people to answer it, could get really, really pricey because you're generally not going to be able to do it just by putting the survey out there and asking people to come look. You're probably going to have to pay. Places you can get data, and there's a lot of places you wouldn't expect. There's a lot more data out there than you would think. Census.gov is actually a really good resource. They don't just have the U.S. Census there. They look at all sorts of stuff. Size of businesses, houses with pets, people who own boats, things like that. A company called InfoChimps has this thing called their data marketplace. It has tons and tons of weird little databases on it that you can pull down. Some of them are totally worthless, so just keep that in mind. But some of them are really good. Data.gov is a resource for the Open Data Project, and governments, city, state, province, provincial, and national governments all over the world have begun releasing data to data.gov. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. You can also just do a search, right? You can just, I've done a search for, smallest marketing agencies in America or total number of agencies in America, and you can get pretty good data from that. You can also just do a search on open data, especially if this is government stuff that you're looking for, because open data is the project that's trying to get government data released, and the government collects data on everything. Don't just think about it as tax data or whatever. There's a lot of information piled up in there. Now again, I'm talking about stuff that's very numbers driven, but data can also mean opinions, the way different people feel about something. It can mean historical news. What have people said about it over time? What have mentions been about it? What have some controversies been? All sorts of things you can think about. And your brain. And this is still the best one because 80% of the content you create will not be data supported. It will be something you come up with out of your head, in which case you're coming up with something totally original and you can't go out and research it. So now we get to the media, and this is another place where I see a lot of stuff go sideways because I see everybody stick with the blue circle, text. Let's just do text, lots of text. And there's a few folks here who have done a really good job of going outside of that. And that's great, but the clients too tend to think in that big blue circle because again, they're thinking about getting their content as cheaply as possible. If you look at different types of content, most of them live in this overlap of images and text. That's where a lot of it ends up. And that's fine, but usually it's lots of text and a couple of images sort of thrown in, and it's just not that exciting, right? There's just not that much going on. If you can get into the overlap between images and text, that's great. And again, when you're coming up with your ideas, when you're researching those questions or whatever, don't worry about that then. Once you have the idea, think about the best way you can present it. This way works pretty well. The real sweet spot, though, is that little teeny area in the middle where you can actually mix in almost every form of media to make something work. It's not because this is somehow the be-all and end-all of how to present content. It's that if you have content that uses all those different media formats, it's generally going to be extremely compelling to the audience. I've tested this again and again. A piece of text content that just has text is outperformed by a piece of content with images and text. A piece of content with images and text is outperformed by one that also has audio or video, and so on. And again, when you're coming up with your idea early on and looking for those questions, think carefully about how you're going to show those answers. If you come up with an idea that lots of other people have done, is there a different way that you can present the answer? Right? Is there a different way you can present the same thing? Just because lots of people have written timelines on Wikipedia does not mean you can't do, doesn't mean you can do a really cool timeline using images like we did for iStock Photo. Right? All sorts of stuff like that you can do. And then the last part of ideation is promotion. And by the way, I would have all these things settled in your head before you go talk to the client. You want to have it all figured out. The more you have it all figured out, the quicker and easier it is to get the client to commit to it, because the client's afraid of the unknowns. If you can show them that you've figured it all out, they're probably going to be far more likely to go with it. So the big one here is psychographics. I could spend 4 hours just talking about this, but just understand you can go onto Facebook, for example, start to create an ad, type in precise interests, and then they'll show you other interests that overlap with that precise interest. So you could go and type in cycling, and then you'll see bowling. Seriously, that does show up. You can also look at far more sites that are dedicated to this, that actually sell data, like Blue Kai and Axiom and all those, but really Facebook will do the trick 90% of the time. You can find influencers. I am so tired of this word because it creates a horrible expectation in the mind of the client that we somehow have access to people that they don't, and that they're paying us for that. So then if we can't get them in front of those influencers, no matter how successful the content is, they don't feel like we've done our job. The other reason is everybody talks about contacting influencers, and I'm not sure where the line is between an influencer and a non-influencer. I mean, part of the property of social media is that everyone potentially is an influencer. So I would ignore that word as much as possible. Instead, think about how you're going to deliver this idea through paid social, for example. And next week, this is something I'll talk about a lot. Think about how you're going to promote it organically through social media and through SEO. Think about your own networks, people you know. Drag out of the client any networks to which they belong, any people that they know who might be helpful. The client will probably say something like, well, that's your job. And then your reply is, you're right, which is why I'm asking you who we can contact. Don't neglect StumbleUpon. It's a great, great resource to use. You'll get 99% crap visitors, and then all of a sudden you'll get one good one, and your content will just go absolutely ballistic. Again, ask the client. You can look at doing pay-per-click search, certainly, but things you want to make sure you have clear in your head as you're coming up with ideas for the content, again, is things like graph protocol tags. You don't have to know what they are, just make sure whoever is doing the production does them. But you, when you do your ideation, should have the content of the tags written and developed and in your head. These should be the first things you put together, because it's going to be a summary and a title. And the summary and the title don't have to be final. Just put them together first. Those will become these, and they're how you describe your ideas. And there are Twitter tags that work the same way. Again, don't have to know what they are, just know that they're out there and they need to be done. And then schema markup. Same thing. Again, I know that's kind of outside of the main topic here, but these are all things you need to keep in mind when you're coming up with those initial ideas. Then it's, where are you going to put it? Right? How are you going to distribute this content? Content doesn't always live on the client's website. This is another thing we've really gotten stuck on because of search. right? Content can live on SlideShare, and there's a lot of benefits. And again, when you're coming up with your ideas, think about this carefully. If you come up with a presentation, the potential to get your client's name in front of many more people is inherent in putting it up on SlideShare, because there are so many thousands of people out there. I have one piece of content that has 99,000 views, and it would not have gotten 99,000 views ever if it was on the Portent site. There is no way, because it wouldn't have had SlideShare promoting it. Content can just go up on Instagram. Content can go up on Pinterest. It can go in all sorts of interesting places. Again, just get outside of the whole idea that it has to go on the site. And again, this is part of the ideation process. If you're sitting there thinking of different kinds of content, you need to think of how it's going to be presented. So if I'm brainstorming my Velcro idea, and I'm thinking about, okay, how do I talk about the silliest uses ever for Velcro, I might say, this might be an article that I write for cracked.com. Maybe it goes up there instead of on the client site. And then if they don't accept it, I put it on the client site and I go tip off cracked.com and let them come to it from there. So again, as you're coming up with the idea, that is part of your idea, is where are you going to deliver it? How are you going to deliver it? You can write a post that just goes on Reddit. I don't recommend that because, again, the whole cynical and scornful thing. But lots and lots of possible ways to post content and get it in front of people. So many ways. Video games are another presentation platform now. You can actually get content placed in video games through ad networks. There are ad networks that actually deliver to video games. It's very strange, but it does actually go out there. So anyway. Oh yeah, and again, please, not the infographics. I mean, if you have something that does really well for an infographic, and one thing to think about, I guess, is what does make a good infographic. Generally, it's going to be process-oriented or it's going to be data-oriented, one or the other. And the last bit here is, where can you go to get ideas? And I'm just going to throw a lot of stuff out, but you can, for example, go to Pinterest and just do searches on things like, data presentation or Velcro or whatever else. In fact, here's a search on Velcro. You can go to sites like The Guardian. Does everybody here know about The Guardian data blog? Okay, well, they present content in many different ways on the data blog, and they present very data-dense stuff. Look at Rolling Stone. They do some amazing long-form content, including this one piece about global warming in Greenland that's mind-blowingly cool. Take a look at sites like A List Apart. And not so much there for the ideas as for the format, the way they present it. Take a look at the New York Times. Just look at what they write about. Don't worry about the format. The array of topics is amazing. And you can find great ideas for your own stuff there. Do look at Quora. Go on Reddit and do a search. Look at what people are asking about on Reddit. Look at the things that are getting most commented and voted up or down on Reddit. Don't skip the stuff that's been voted down extensively. It might be really interesting. Take a look at StumbleUpon. What's the most stumbled content that day? If it's something geeky that you're writing about, take a look at Hacker News. One thing I would suggest, by the way, is that we build this enormous database of these, but if anyone wants to take that on, let me know, because I don't really have the spare time at the moment. Look at the Library of Congress website. There's tons of stuff up there. Add history of before any single thing that you're going to be talking about. History of photography, history of photos, history of stock photos, history of Velcro, history of Velcro shoes. Why are there no Velcro running shoes left in America? There's lots of interesting questions there. 5 history, and then just start putting things together as you're doing that. You'll run into things, random stuff. Like as I was searching deeper and deeper on Velcro, for some reason Napoleon showed up. There was no reason for it. There was no mention of the phrase. It was like 10 pages in on Google. But suddenly I thought of something like, it's something I always go back to, 10 historical figures who could have benefited from Velcro. or mythical thing. Odysseus really could have helped. So stuff like that. So you just want to kind of explore what's out there and let that take you in different directions. There's no great one formula for coming up with content ideas, but if you just keep digging, you're going to find something interesting. And I don't mean you're going to find something to copy. I mean something will occur to you because of what you're looking at. To me, it's one of the most fun things to do, is just dig around until you find a really cool idea. And as you're doing that, you're going to start to get more ideas for how to present it, for where to present it, because you're going to start seeing those things popping up on certain sites. And one thing I do in my process is I just write down all the places that I'm finding stuff, so that as time passes, I have a list of places where I can potentially promote the same content. That's really it. This was truly the first mini training instead of the 1 hour and 1.5 hour mini training. Questions?
Can you use Mechanical Turk for surveys, or is that going to be terrible quality?
Can you use Mechanical Turk for surveys? You can if you trick people.
Yeah.
So here's what I usually do. I will I will say, go to this page and pick check the box for the item that you think is more important. But then I'll change the colors of the boxes, and I'll look instead at how people respond to the different colors, because that's really what I want to know. So don't directly ask for what you want, if that makes any sense. You can do a survey like, I'm doing a pet survey, please fill this out. And then just ask them, how many miles a day do you walk with your pet? And then what you're finding out is, how many miles a day do you walk? All sorts of little things like that. Just, anything observed changes, so just try to make it so it doesn't look like someone's being observed. Megan? I think Megan had a question.
Well, I had more of a comment. It may be too obvious, but I was just thinking, when you come up with your idea, make sure to Google it, so you know that it's not overdone,
Mm-hmm.
or that something stinky shows up.
Yeah, no, that's a really good, just for the video. The comment there was just make sure that you Google any particular idea you come up with to make sure it hasn't been beaten to death or is associated with some horrifically nasty topic or something like that. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
So you talk about Facebook ads, but what do you think about graph search? Do you think that's useful for anything?
Graph search, it's useful, but I have no idea how you really manage it. I mean, if you know of a really good paid advertising mechanism that actually controls how you show up in graph search, then you're ahead of me, because I haven't seen anything. Yeah. Very few people search on Facebook, right? It's the more passive graph search that can make a difference. So when it just, when Facebook just starts showing stuff in your feed or in the ads because of other things you've looked at. But of course, that's what we're trying to do with paid promotion anyway. I do think Google's knowledge graph search is pretty interesting, because it seems to impact rankings, which is why I talk about schema markup. Because, for example, you want things tagged as articles so that when Google goes looking for those deeper knowledge articles, they find something like yours, because that's definitely a qualifier for them.
How do you find a mix between traditional blog posts and going out and doing these crazy cool pieces of content?
Based on budget, if there were no budget, I would never do a blog post. Or at least I wouldn't do a typical blog post. Okay, I would always you'd always want to do blog posts because they're very digestible, they're good content, people can read them. But I would never do the really standard 4 paragraphs of text with nothing else. I'd want really high production value of whatever I'm putting out there. My favorite right now is long form content, but I change almost weekly. And long form content's so trendy right now that I may have to stop doing it, because now everybody all of a sudden is doing long form content. But yeah, I would do a lot less blog posts and a lot more of other kinds of stuff. And there's no reason that kind of stuff can't be presented in a blog post, right? You do long form content, it can just be a really long blog post. But just, you want to try and think outside the typical blog post, the things that the picture the client has in their mind of a blog post.
What's so bad about infographics? Is it because there's just too many of them, or they're just all shitty?
There's nothing terrible about infographics. It's just, they're usually done terribly. The problem with infographics is people just start stuffing all sorts of content into infographics and then think it's magically an infographic, and that's not the case. Infographics are about data visualization and process visualization. If you don't have any data and you don't have any process, there is no point in having an infographic. And then, doing it halfway decently really helps too. It's not supposed to be made more confusing by all the different fonts and stuff. It's supposed to be made less confusing, and very few people seem to get that.
I have a question on psychographics. So, is there a certain process that you use to kind of, like some kind of filter that you use that's like, this is a human truth, this is something that people actually want to read about, or it's going to be interesting, shareable? What's your process with that?
You know what? That's where the brain kind of comes in. I don't generally, there's nothing you can go out and look at for that. What I do look at for psychographics is, stages in people's lives, for example, and typical patterns and needs for people in those stages of their lives. Like the infamous example of Target sending, pregnancy-related products to a 16-year-old who had started buying pregnancy-related stuff at their store. But, it's also about overlapping ideas. It's very much about, the one I always use is an overlap of some other interest and some sport, or some particular kind of food and other foods, or some kind of TV show. And certain other concepts. You can look on Twitter to see what the hashtags are. That's a lot of what I use psychographics for. Oh, one thing, sorry. That can be a very good Mechanical Turk survey or a good Google consumer survey. When you can just go out on Mechanical Turk and say, please pick your favorite TV show, and then make the TV shows about different things. So maybe one's science fiction, one's another genre, etc., and then you can start figuring out what people's favorite genre are. Anything else? Cool. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, you don't have to clap at the end.